Welcome, everyone, to Is Your Leadership Mindset Failing You? Uh, I am Dan Rust, and I'm here with my partner today, Lee Russell. Um, you can see a little bit of introductory information about each of us on the screen right now. I am based in the US, in the Midwest area of the United States. Um, and you can see my LinkedIn address if in case you want to reach out and connect via LinkedIn. And Lee, do you want to share any color commentary regarding yourself?
Yeah, hi everyone. Great to see so many people joining. Thanks, Dan. So, Lee Russell, I'm not based in the US anywhere glamorous. I'm actually in Southwest London, here in the good old UK. And we're excited to kind of explore this topic with you today and kind of bringing together both of our different experiences, mine from the corporate learning side, as also Dan worked in as well. But we have a deep passion for leadership and the psychology that goes behind the mindset as well. So we hope you're going to enjoy it. We hope you get stuck in and looking forward to exploring the next 60 minutes with you all.
And so before we kick off, we have to pay for our supper, so to speak. This webinar is sponsored by our employer, Infopro Learning. And Infopro Learning is a broad-based, multi-focused training vendor. There are divisions and departments within Infopro that handle virtually every aspect of learning and development, from custom e-learning to delivery of instructor-led training, live and virtual. We have custom content. We have off-the-shelf content. We even facilitate some programs that leverage client content, but we provide our facilitators. You can see some of our clients listed on the screen, and essentially whatever your learning needs might be. If you're looking for a vendor resource, certainly InfoPro, we would hope that you would consider InfoPro. And then in the leadership space, InfoPro has a library of over 60 off-the-shelf leadership development programs. These programs are all available as on-site classroom delivery. They're also available as virtual instructor-led delivery. They're not available as e-learning or synchronous digital training, primarily because most of these programs focus in on behavior change and mindset change, and we just think that instructor-led and facilitated programs are the way that we have found to best affect those types of changes in the leadership space. So, with that said, we're now going to move into, is your leadership mindset failing you? And then the natural question, of course, is, well, what do we mean by leadership mindset? Well, the essence of what we mean is that um, you can see on the screen, we've got 7 particular aspects of an individual's leadership mindset. Um, some of us are naturally more strategic thinkers. Some of us are naturally more tactical thinkers. And so part of one's leadership mindset is, where do you fall on that spectrum of strategic versus tactical? We're not saying that one is better than the other or one is right. It's really, what we're saying is, for any given situation, there's an aspect of strategic versus tactical thinking on that spectrum that's probably ideal for an individual situation, even though most of us have a natural set point. The same is true with the next spectrum: data-driven versus gut instinct decisions, confidence versus humility, optimism versus paranoia, being a driver or persuader, having that behavioral style versus having the behavioral style of being more of a collaborative consensus builder. Focus on financials versus focus on people and culture. And also, in terms of your own growth mindset as a leader, you have some leaders who have very much a mindset of developing new expertise, a growth mindset, whereas other leaders, their mindset is more leveraging their current expertise. And naturally, when someone is a new leader, they tend to drift more toward the green end of that spectrum because they're developing new expertise. And then over time, as a leader develops more functional expertise, oftentimes they lean more into leveraging their existing expertise. And there does come a point where many mid-career leaders aren't really growing any longer. They're leveraging their existing expertise. And again, we're not saying any aspect of this is right or wrong for any particular situation. But when we use the term leadership mindset, we're referring to these seven spectra of thinking and behaving. And really the question when it comes to is your leadership mindset failing you, that leads us to the question of, well, what is the ideal leadership mindset for today's world? And today's world is a bit challenging. We find that in today's world, um, we're not just changing. We're not just experiencing change. We're actually experiencing a lot of disruption in today's world. And so, what we wanted to do first is walk you through the disruption that's occurring in our world, in our worlds, globally, and then that description of the disruptors is going to lead us to, given the disrupted world that we live in, what is the ideal mindset for a leader today? And then give you some food for thought regarding assessing your own mindset, reflecting on your own mindset, and reflecting where might your mindset need to evolve in order to be an optimal fit for today's world. But let's back up to disruption. So, how is our world being disrupted? Let's start with the easy stuff. Globalization. You know, I'm a man of a certain age where I've been hearing about globalization for, I don't really want to reveal the number of decades, but let's say it's more than three. It was more than 3 decades. Could be 5 decades. For a long time, we've been hearing about globalization, but now in today's world, particularly today's post-pandemic world, globalization is simply part of the nature of business. We are impacted by global supply chains, global communication, global workforces. We are thinking and acting more globally than ever before, to the point where a global mindset has definitely been normalized for many business leaders. But that's just one of the disruptions. There's also the remote hybrid work disruption. Man, even organizations that have gone remote in response to the pandemic and now have come back to the office or partially come back to the office. One of the things I'm hearing, and I probably have every year 500 conversations with organizational leaders. Some of them are clients of our Fortune 500 clients. Some of them are um, uh, prospective clients. Many of them are just interesting people in the leadership space. And one of the things I'm hearing is even people who have returned to the office generally because they've either been required to or for whatever reason, many of them are still retaining a lot of the habits that they developed when they were working from home, both positive and somewhat challenging. So I had one client where they had mandated a return back to the office, and what they found was that okay, everyone came back to the office, but everyone was essentially working from home in the office. They're working in a very isolated way. They weren't collaborating. They even found that some teams were having teams meetings. Everyone was staying in their office. They're staying in the same physical location, and everyone's just logging into Teams to meet, but not meeting in the conference room, not meeting in a live space, which I just found very interesting. But we know that the world of remote work has become more and more prevalent, and it has disrupted behaviors. It's disrupted the way we think about our workflow. But again, that's just one of the disruptions that we're having to deal with. There's also the disruption of increasing diversity. When you look at today's workforce, compared to the workforce of 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. We have an incredibly diverse workforce, and partially because people feel more comfortable today coming to work as they are rather than having to fit into a particular mold or fit into a particular pattern. So we have people much more willing to come to work as the individuals that they are. Plus, we have, in fact, greater diversity in our workforce. Again, this has gone through a huge shift in the last 10 years, and it is something that is disrupting the way we lead people. So we're leading people who have gone through the pandemic. We're leading people who are hyper diverse. And one aspect of that diversity is generational diversity. In many workplaces, you have 5 generations in the workforce. And these generations do, and I'm not, there's no judgment about uh, who is better, who is more effective, who's more productive. But baby boomers do process workflow differently than Gen Z. Gen X processes work differently than millennials and Gen Z. So wherever you or your workforce might fall in terms of generations, and I know that there are new generations beyond Gen Z, and there are other names, but the essence of the thought is that we have multiple generations in the workplace who are processing our leadership differently. They need different things from our leadership. A typical baby boomer employee needs something different from his or her leader than a millennial or a Gen Z employee. And you may have been successful as a leader leading certain types of employees. I had someone last week say to me, here's the thing. I'm doing great with baby boomers and Gen X because they take direction, they track with my thinking, they align with my metrics and objectives. But when it comes to my younger employees, it seems like they just need more from me. Sometimes they need a coach, sometimes they need a mentor, sometimes they need a guide, sometimes it feels like they need a parent, sometimes they need a therapist, and they turn to me, and I don't know. That's just not how I'm built. And so I appreciated that that leader was sharing with me, part of his frustration. But in fact, I think it represents another disruption in our workforce, having multiple generations in the workforce at the same time. But as I said, that's just one of many disruptions. Let's take a look at another one. AI. AI is sorry, I advanced my slide too soon. AI is in fact disrupting workflows, disrupting productivity, disrupting career paths. We have employees who are now saying, how do I choose a career path, or how do I choose where I focus my own learning and development, because I don't want my career to be disrupted by AI. But in fact, AI and other technologies are disrupting everything about our business. And we could have two or three webinars just regarding AI disruptions. And how do leaders think about AI? How do leaders coach their teams on how to leverage AI effectively? Because if you're not leveraging it, if you're not helping your teams learn how to leverage AI effectively, and you're just going to let them sort of free rein it, or figure it out on their own, some are going to do so, others maybe not so much. Um, I had a client who told me the story of he had encouraged his team to use AI to rewrite uh, client emails. Like write your client email and then use an AI application to do a rewrite just to make sure that everything was spelled correctly and everything was phrased correctly. And it honestly, it was working just fine for him, because he had a number of employees who were making small grammatical errors, small typo errors, and in fact, the AI application was correcting all of that. So it was actually quite good, except that what began to happen is they began to lean too far into the application, and they really were not recognizing when sometimes AI was changing the meaning, the context, the tone. And they even had a couple of clients at a certain point respond back to them, or communicate back to them, that the clients could tell that certain messages felt very blah and bland. And one client even said, it's almost like, it felt like I was talking to an AI bot via email. So if AI is a great tool, but if you're not discerning on how it's used, it can actually do as much harm as good, and not just that kind of light harm, but there's also, as you know, there's a dark side to technology. There's a dark side to AI, and AI is as much being used by your competitors as well as your own organization. And so AI is being used to create scams. AI is being used to, break through security protocols. AI is being used for a lot of purposes that are less than nice. And we have to help our employees get better educated about the dark side of AI, the dark side of technology, because if we don't, what we don't want them doing is learning the hard way. So again, that's just one more disruption in the leadership landscape. And I'm just getting started. Let's talk for a moment about information overload. If you're like most leaders and workers in today's world, man, the flow of emails, the flow of tasks, the flow of chats, the flow of projects, basically the work stream that's coming at you is never ending, and the information to process is never ending. And I had someone say to me a couple of weeks ago, she said, you know what? It took me a while to learn that no matter how efficient I am, no matter how fast I am, no matter how many hours I put in, it doesn't stop. It's not going to stop. I have to get better at saying no. I have to get better at just deciding not to do certain things. But she said it is a nonstop flow of information. And just as importantly, a nonstop flow of disinformation. That is becoming even more challenging in our world today, discerning between what's real, what's not real, what data can I count on, what data can I not count on. As you're trying to define your business strategy, as you're trying to define your customer engagement approach, there's so many things that are impacted by information and data, but you have to make sure that your data is real. And unfortunately, that information and misinformation is being fed to our employees 7/24 through these lovely devices that 20 years ago didn't exist. It didn't take long though. I remember when I made my first trip to Saudi Arabia and smartphones, existed. Smartphones were becoming relatively common in the Western world. I think this goes back maybe 20 years, 15 years. Um, but they were ubiquitous. They were throughout Saudi Arabia, and I was going through a shopping mall, and I was seeing children, women in burqas. Everyone had their mobile device. Everyone had their smartphone device, and I think we have yet to really understand the impact of that 7/24 access to news, information, entertainment, um, misinformation, um, social information, and we don't always have the ability to discern what is social, what is news, what is data. Sometimes what feels social is actually intended to be commercial. What feels like news is intended to be commercial. So the whole flow of information and misinformation is absolutely new in today's world, and I think we're still figuring out how is that impacting my workforce, and how does that impact how I need to show up as a leader? How does that impact what they need from me in terms of communication, in terms of a variety of things, particularly since most of us, we receive that flow alone in our own devices, and there's a certain sense of isolation that sometimes gets created, particularly, you've heard of the term doom scrolling, or gloom scrolling, some people call it. Um, if you're wondering to what degree, why are your employees so cynical, so doubtful, so uncertain? A lot of it is because this is what's flowing at them day in and day out. You might have 45 minutes with them at a weekly meeting. Okay, that's great. You have a good weekly meeting for 45 minutes. The world, through their phones, has access to them the entire week. Lee, you had a comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to add a thought into that as well, Dan, in the sense of, when years ago, or say years ago, before the COVID times, being present was incredibly important as a leader, and actually that thought process to be present and be in the moment was vital. And the role of devices kind of crept in more and more. I think we can all draw examples of being in a meeting with a C-suite exec member, and the distraction around a multiple emails or pings or text is always kind of there. And I think now that a lot of organizations are in this hybrid world, if everyone's off camera, you can't even see that, right? You can't
Yeah.
see that present disconnect. And I wonder, maybe for people watching this, how cognizant are you of the fact of actually being present with people, but also them feeling your presence there, in terms of actually there's not the distractions, there's not that information being fed into them as you're trying to have that that one conversation
Mhm.
with them. And it was just an interesting point to kind of think that actually we have one medium of communication kind of removed to a certain degree, but actually they have a lot more in their faces right now, and we're removed from that as leaders.
Absolutely. And I have a global team, so we work together remotely. And one of my absolute mandates is that we are always cameras on. If because it's already hard enough to create those human connections with each other. If we're going to
Mm,
have an hour-long meeting with each other once a week or a couple of times a week, we're going to be cameras on. And now some of the meetings are informal cameras on, like you just show up as you are, however you might be, and then others are more business oriented, particularly if it ends up being a client facing meeting. But you're so right. We have to work harder than ever on maintaining and enhancing those human connections.
mm,
Um, One other aspect of disruption is we have employees who are more and more frustrated with what we might call menial work. And part of this, I'm going to go back to this world that's being fed to them, that's being fed to our employees. This is a world where every young man is driving a Bugatti. Every young woman is a size zero. Everyone else seems to be living this amazing life and have this oh, they're on vacation. They're going here. They're doing this. Oh, it looks so fun while I'm just working. So there's a certain disinformation that's being communicated via social media that creates these unreasonable expectations for what the lives of others are. And so we end up doing, or end up having employees who are less excited about their jobs than what we might have been used to. I remember my first job, and it was a gritty, dirty job, but I was excited to have it. But I also didn't have this perception of the world where everyone else was living, such an amazing life. I just thought that this is the way the world is, and I was excited to have a first gritty, dirty job. This young man happens to work in an Amazon warehouse. In addition to social media feeding this perception to him, part of that social media feed, imagine that you're this young man, and after a hard day at work where your productivity is being timed, your movements are being timed, your number of deliveries or assemblies per hour is being timed. And at the end of each day, at the end of each week, man, if your productivity is drifting downwards, somebody comes and has a talk with you. Imagine being in an environment like that, and then coming home at the end of the day and you check out your Instagram feed, and oh, lo and behold, the ultimate owner of your business. Oh, there he is. There's his $600 million yacht. Oh, there's the new woman that he is with now after divorcing. Oh, and it turns out, according to the article that I just read, even after a divorce, he's still the wealthiest person in the world. So he lost half, and he's still the wealthiest person in the world. And I'm not judging. I have no issues with anybody working hard and acquiring wealth. The point is not judgment. The point is think about how that impacts your day-to-day workers when suddenly they see things. If you are the CEO of a business, if you are whoever you might be, even non-Amazon employees see this, and when we wonder why they are so cynical about the world in general and about business in general, part of that cynicism is being fed to them every single day, every single hour. So I grew up in an environment where generally we felt like the system worked. We felt like, hey, if you pay your dues, if you work hard enough. I remember my father saying, look, I don't care what you want to do, but pick something and then work hard. And ultimately, if you work hard, that will be enough for you to achieve whatever your dreams are. So just pick something, make a decision. It was a time when, whether it was real or not, we felt like the system worked. Today, not so much. Again, I'm not debating whether this is true or not. I'm just focusing on the broad perception, and not just of our younger employees, of our mid-career and older employees as well. There's a sense that the system doesn't work, the system can't be trusted. And this does impact the way they see us as leaders. I remember a day when new employees would come to work their first day, their first week. And they would start from a perception of trust. They would start from a perception that, hey, this business must know what it's doing, or they wouldn't be successful. My leader must know what he or she is doing, or they wouldn't be successful. They wouldn't be in their position. So they start from a position of trust until proven otherwise. You, because as a leader, as a business, you could prove otherwise. Now it's the opposite. Employees start with a position of, you know what? I'm going to do the work. I'll do the job, but I'm gonna watch very carefully for evidence that you might not be all that, or the business might not be all of that. And so this this shift in attitudes, it is a huge disruption, and it does impact how we need to show up for those employees as a leader. But let's think about another disruption. The last research report on this that I read indicated that approximately 12 to 15% of employees throughout the developed world, not just in the UK, not just in the US, but throughout the developed world, approximately 12 to 15%.
Did we lose Dan? Or am I lost? Can somebody just pop in the chat if you can still hear me and we've just seemed to have lost Dan?
My apologies. Do you have me back
Oh,
now?
there we are. Thanks, Mitch.
See,
Yep.
I think
Sorry, Dan.
I think this is part of the design. I mentioned pharmaceuticals, and suddenly you can't see me anymore. Not that
Gone.
I'm cynical, but perhaps it's not an accident. But but we have a medicated workforce, and you can't tell me that that doesn't have some impact on the way people show up to work. In addition, and I'm gonna end on this soon, because I know this is gonna be overwhelming when you start to think about, oh my God, how much disruption is there? Well, the reality is our world is being dramatically disrupted. We are drinking more coffee, caffeinated tea, energy drinks than ever before. We should be a hugely energized world because we are ingesting so much caffeine. We're also eating an awful lot of fast food and industrialized food, manufactured food. Our entire food system is very suspect in terms of the nutrients that are being delivered to us. We're getting a lot more salt than we are, actual micronutrients. But if we're drinking caffeine and we're eating fast food, we also have a workforce that is far more tired than ever before, more exhausted than ever before, more overwhelmed than ever before. Uh, Sometimes they work hard to show up and put a good face on, but we have a lot of employees who are struggling. In fact, we did some research recently because we were asked to refresh a time management training course. And in the process of refreshing the time management training course and spending time with the client's employees, one of the things we uncovered was that the issue wasn't their time management skills. The issue was they were tired. They were overwhelmed. And so it wasn't the issue of knowing how to use Outlook or specific, skills and systems. It was energy. And we actually shifted the focus of development because, in fact, if those employees were going to become more productive, we had to address the root cause. And it certainly wasn't their use of or misuse of Outlook. So, one final disruptor is the complexity of business. Business is more complex today than ever before. It's also faster today than ever before. And when you wonder, why are we struggling with the onboarding of new leaders, the onboarding of new employees? Why are they not getting things as quickly and easily as they used to get things when we onboard them? Now, part of it might be the employees themselves, but I think a part of it is business is just harder. There are systems, processes, software, technologies, there's all kinds of elements. And we who have been living in this for 10, 20, 30 years, we've had time to acclimate. But imagine you're the young person coming out of university, and then suddenly this hits you like a cold wave of water. There is a lot of complexity within our business. And so, with all of that disruption, I'm sure most of you know the metaphorical story of, how do you boil a frog? You start by putting in a pan of cold water, and then you slowly heat up the water. Um, the way I think of that story is, I think the water, metaphorically, of our workplace has been warming up and warming up and warming up just a degree or two every year for the last 10 years. Maybe during the pandemic, maybe it notched up a little bit more rapidly, but that temperature has been heating up and heating up. And I read, about 2 weeks ago, I read a story about the Bering Sea, and the Bering Sea's temperature last year, uh, broadly speaking, increased by zero point 0.3 degrees, and that drove a massive die-off of crabs. The entire crab population was decimated. The entire crabbing industry was decimated in the Bering Sea. Huge impact. But it wasn't really that 0.3% the previous year. It was the cumulative percentage of increases. And then at a certain point, there was a tipping point, which caused this massive die-off. And I feel like our workforce is reaching a tipping point. And it's up to leaders to understand what's shifting and changing and to get ahead of the game. Because if you don't, the indicators, if you wonder, why are they so angry? Why are they protesting? Globally speaking, these are our employees. These are our employees who are protesting, and they are frustrated by what's happening in their lives, and they're feeling like the system doesn't work, or the system is working against me. And so all of these challenges are happening within the minds of some of our employees, along with some of the more meta global issues like global warming and other environmental issues. And I'm not saying that you, as a leader, your job is to solve global warming. That's not what I'm saying. But I am saying that our jobs as leaders is to recognize the world that our workforce is evolving within, and ask ourselves the question, what do they need from me today? How do they need me to show up today? What kind of leader do I need to be today to meet them where they are? Because where they are is directionless. Where they are is, and this may be you too. I mean, I know sometimes it's me where I'm thinking, what am I going to do with the next 10 years? What direction do I want to go? How do I want to evolve? Um, young young people coming out of university or going into university who are wondering, how do I how do I pick a major? How do I choose a career path? I've talked to career counselors who say to me their most common question from students is, "Hey, help me choose a career path that won't be impacted by AI, or won't be impacted by technology, or won't be impacted by cultural change or societal change. Where can I go for the clarity, for so that when I invest all of these years and all of this money, the career will be there when I get there?" And the career counselors are saying to me, I don't know what to tell them. I don't know that I have an answer, except maybe go into AI, maybe make that part of a career path. But that only works for a certain kind of person. And so you take all of this, and I promise I'm done now. I could go on. I mean, I've got a list on my desk of disruptions, and I've gone through about two-thirds of it. But there are lots of other disruptions happening within our world that impacts how leaders need to show up. If you feel a little alone and feel like you figuring this out is a little tough, one of the instinctive responses can be, man, I just want to go back to the way things were. Or I had one gentleman say to me, what I'm going to, and we had this conversation about a year ago, toward the beginning of 2024. And he said, look, I just talked to my recruiting team. We're going to start screening for work ethic. We're going to start screening more heavily for grit. We're going to start screening more heavily. We want people who really want the job, are excited to come to come to work, want to do the hard work. So he had decided that the answer was going to be screening. So his recruiting team got much more proactive about screening to only get like the kinds of employees they really want. I checked in with him 2 months ago and I said, "So how did the screening go?" And he said, "Well, the biggest challenge is we had so few make it through the screening. We just we ultimately had to ease up because we couldn't find enough employees who fit through that screen, so to speak. And he said, so I'm a little humbled, and I've got to figure out, how do I help employees become who they need to be in order to work with us? Now, we'll find some that are fantastic the way they are, but we're going to have to grow many of them ourselves. And he said that's a big realization for me, in terms of, at that very fundamental level, that skills-based level, I'm going to have to grow many of my best employees, not just find them. But I thought he was a great example of someone who had kind of unlocked himself from old ways of thinking. I still talk to a lot of leaders who are locked in to old ways of thinking. And one of the images I like to share with them, I know this is a pretty graphic image, and sorry if I trigger anybody, but this is an image of three male deer whose horns got locked in together, and because they could not unlock their horns, they ultimately ended up dying. And I think the reason I like this image is it's a graphic reminder of the potential cost for not being able to unlock yourself. And so I do think that we have to ask ourselves, when we're focusing on leadership mindset, not what is my mindset naturally, but what does my mindset need to be in order to be the leader who shows up for my people today. And these little indicators, the little white indicators, though that's not meant to indicate what's right. That's meant to it's just meant as an example of, as you're assessing, where do I need to be. I think every leader has to go through their own thought process, assessing where they are currently, where they need to be to show up for their people. And we have a little more content to share with you regarding self-reflection, and how do you as a leader, or how do you help your leaders go through that self-reflective process in order to think through, how do I show up? How do I need to show up ultimately for them? And I know, Lee, you have some other thoughts on
Mm.
that self-reflection.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, from my perspective, there's that thing we all get on an aircraft when we travel, which is secure your own life best before helping anybody else. And for me, mindset and the leadership mindset is all about that. You've got to be able to understand your default position across a variety of situations. You've got to be able to interpret what the outcomes of that position are. And then you've got to have the knowledge and the skills and the behaviors to be able to think to yourself, right, I need to shift that mindset to a more impactful, to a more progressive position. And this tool that you're looking at here is one that I developed around about 8 years ago now. And it's a culmination between some of the work I've done around emotional intelligence and around the work of personality profiling, both profile for personalities, but also for traits and behaviors as well. And I worked with lots of organizations to kind of gather thoughts, gather ideas, gather norms, legacies, traditions, all of those other things that you would expect. And I came up with this solution because one of the key things for me is that from a leadership perspective, it can be very difficult to understand how your mindset is actually driving certain results, driving certain outcomes, whether that's with people, whether that's with the business. And then what that does is it gives you the opportunity to be able to support others. So you can recognize when somebody's perhaps in a more unhealthy mindset position, and actually think to yourself, well, how do I help them get through this position? Now, let me explain what we're looking at here and kind of give you a quick overview of this tool, because we've got the central measure, which is around control and influence, top to bottom, high to low. And ultimately, this is the perception of control or influence that you think you have, A, over yourself, and also B, over a particular situation. So if you're on your way to work, as an example, and you feel like you're already running late, and all of a sudden you recognize that you're running late and you're aware that that's happening and you don't like that feeling, the traffic lights then stay on red. There's then a broken down truck. There's then another set of traffic lights. Has anybody ever said to themselves, gosh, why does every set of traffic lights seem to be on red today? It happens to us sometimes. Although what we're feeling at that point is this sense of lack of control, that something is happening, is conspiring against us. And we're incredibly aware of that. We're either frustrated by it, we're either annoyed by it. Road rage clearly happens for some people, but you get to that position where you feel like a victim. So that low control and influence around a situation, around what's happening, plus a high awareness and regard, gives this victim mindset. Now, if we apply that into a work context and into our roles, if you're a particular senior leader, you could feel that actually you have quite high control and quite high awareness and regard, but something can happen. Maybe a board meeting, maybe a board report, maybe some new stats come out for the organization into the public domain. All of a sudden, that sense of control and influence flips and it drops. Now, the successful people, well, I say not successful people, the people that are aware of that shift in themselves are able to manage that. People that are not aware will kind of be in that victim mindset for a certain amount of time and then all of a sudden think, right, well, I need to do something about this. And that statement internally of I need to do something about this is where you're starting to pull yourself back up that axis and starting to take back some of that control. So when we're saying, and Dan was talking about reflection there, that's ultimately a question that you need to ask yourself when you're in that victim mindset. Now, the empowered position will also recognize when there is nothing that can be done, but it will also appreciate that that's okay because you're aware of that and you're aware of what you can and cannot control and influence. So that's a really important distinction to make. And then if we flip across to the top left-hand side, we kind of go the other direction from victim, where all of a sudden our awareness and regard of others and of how we're talking, how we're acting, how we're engaging with people is quite low. It's not there, it's not present. But our sense of control and influence over ourselves, over individuals, over situations is very high, it's very visceral. And we actually become quite transactional. Now, this transactional is pretty straightforward in the sense of do this, do that, make this happen, make that happen. Thank you very much. It's quite straightforward. Now, in certain circumstances, i.e., if you're a chief fire officer and you're at the scene of an out of control fire, you're going to have to be pretty transactional right there and then. How people think and feel and how you think and feel is just not important. Now, unless anybody on here is a chief of police or a chief of fire, in our normal day-to-day work with people in organizational ecosystems, being transactional as a leader is actually suboptimal to engagement and performance. And through the research that we've done, and we're always happy to share this post session, organizations that have been deemed to have higher transactional mindsets within their populations have increased attrition rates, higher recruitment costs, and lower productivity because people don't stand it for very long. And going back to what Dan shared earlier of the different generations of people, there is one generation that absolutely despises this mindset, and that is the Gen Zs. And I'll say Z because we're with you, Dan, but in UK we'd say Z.
Zed.
But yeah, but the younger generation who like to feel that sense of value, to at least have their opinion heard, and to feel that connection to the organization. If they get the sense that they're just there as a number and to achieve and just to do stuff, they're quickly out of there, and we lose talent very quickly. So part of that challenge around transactional is if we're going to think, how do we get to empowered from transactional? Actually, we need to be thinking more about what do people perceive me as? How do people perceive me? But also, if we're talking about how we secure our own life as first, how do I perceive myself? How do I want to be seen? Now, sometimes, particularly in very senior positions with lots of experience, and I've done this through exec coaching in the past, it can be very difficult to actually just take that introspective look at ourselves. But it's not a judgment, and it's not a fact of going, well, you've got all of these bad traits. What it's about is just that realignment between the view that you want people to have of yourself. Now, I'm not a well, I don't know what the word is, but actually, there are people that will still dislike you, and that's okay. There are people that will still disagree with you, and that's okay. So the fact that actually you might have people that disagree or don't like you or don't engage with you as much as some other people doesn't mean that you're a bad leader or that your mindset is failing you. There's another element around personality. And there's those elements around awareness and regard that can be explored through conversations, through different types of discussions that you have, through actually just reflecting on your own presence and your own position that you have. So transactional empowered victim. And then the bottom left is actually a result of not managing transactional and victim. If you don't manage your victim state and you continue to feel like a victim, you've heard people say you're on a downward spiral. Well, that downward spiral is because your awareness and regard is also going to begin to disappear. You will start to feel, well, this always happens to me. This is always what I get. I always get the bad end of the stick. And then eventually you'll start not to think that, you will start to fundamentally believe that. And then that will really damage awareness and regard. And you get to that quite dangerous point, if I'm honest, of being powerless, where you don't feel that great sense of control or influence, and you don't feel that great sense of awareness and regard. And the key thing to remember is that when we're saying low, not no. It's not that you don't have any of control or influence, or you don't have any awareness of regard. It's just incredibly lower than what it was before. Now, that bottom left often requires external intervention or third-party intervention in terms of people being able to spot that. Somebody might be more reserved and out of the environment than what they previously were. Their productivity may be dipping and they're turning up on less conversations, less calls. That could be early signs that they're either feeling this victim mentality or they're in a transactional state and they're just dealing with things and not really engaging with others. So that's something just to think about. But in summary, and there's a lot I've sort of gone through there, and do feel free to pose any questions in the chat or put your hand up and we can always turn on your mic to ask a question directly. But the ultimate consideration is that the optimal mindset is the empowered position. You protect the value of yourself and others, whilst also balancing the control and influence you have over the decisions that you make, over the impact that you have, and over the situations that you are working within. Anything other than empowered is suboptimal. No matter what justification people can make, it is suboptimal for leadership. And so when Dan was talking about the previous slides where we had the left to the right, you can actually overlay what we've got here to a certain degree to some of those points. Somebody might be data driven. Now, actually, you can be data driven, but what you don't want to be doing as a leader is be a data driven transactional leader, because actually what will happen one day is you'll turn around and nobody will be following you and nobody will recognize you as a leader or future senior C-suite leader of an organization. So actually there's an element there of just thinking about those 7 different components that Dan shared, where they sit within this, and actually how you navigate through these different experiences. For us as a business, as Infopro, we have workshops on this, as you would expect, and we work with all different levels inside organizations. And one of the things we encourage people to do is a test and learn mindset trigger diary. And actually just taking a couple of weeks post workshop, having a printout of this and giving yourself some just ticks. That's all it is, just ticks, little ticks where you feel you've perhaps slipped in or you've maintained that mindset position. And you start to get a real good idea of how your mindset is naturally navigating towards certain things, and then it starts to give you ideas about how you can get more frequently maintain that empowered mindset. But we wanted to share that as a useful sort of cognitive process and viewpoint. And look, no consultancy is worth its salt without a 4-box grid. And ta-da, there we are, 4-box grid. And it's always top right for the best one as well.
Well, and Lee, what this helps me is, or how this helps me is, I've had many conversations with leaders about these disruptions. And
Mm,
oftentimes, as we go through them in detail, you can sense the feeling of powerlessness from them
hmm
first, because awareness is just beginning to build, and they don't necessarily have a sense of what can I do about it, what should I do
mm,
about it. And as that awareness, as we go through disruption after disruption after disruption, it generally transitions from a feeling of powerlessness to
mm,
victimhood, a sense of,
mm,
oh man, the world is changing, and there's nothing I can do about it. And it's
mm.
natural, I think, and it's a natural progression because, of
Yes.
course, we want to help leaders um, develop a sense of what you can do about it. And so, hopefully, what you experience in this next 10 minutes is can help you transition from the feeling of powerlessness or victimhood more toward empowerment, because we're going to give you some specific guidance in terms of what should you do. And the first guidance is take the time for self-reflection. Don't don't fall into the trap of feeling like I need an answer now. We have been through social media, through TikTok, through all the things that are impacting us. We have this urging for quick answers, quick solutions, and I think for each of us individually in this space, the answers aren't going to be quick. The answers have to be deep. And so we would like to give you some guidance in terms of how to guide your own self reflection. And some of the guidance we can provide you right now is when we ask employees, what do they want from leaders? So we do our own research, but you can see we've got data from Harvard Business, from Talent MLS, from PRSA, from OC Tanner that reinforces this. But these are the 5 things that employees tell us that they're looking for from their leaders: empathy and emotional intelligence. And and obviously empathy is a part of emotional intelligence, but empathy is the word that comes back over and over again. Employees will say, I want to know that my leader sees me and appreciates me, knows me as a human, not as a function, not as a metric, but as a function. Sees and knows me. They want flexibility and autonomy. Now, of course, as a leader, you have to be discerning about that, and that has to be in some cases earned. But they want a degree of flexibility and autonomy. They want career growth, and they want it fast. They want it faster than most of us are used to giving it. I remember a day when you took a job and you weren't going to ask about what's the next career step until maybe a couple of years in. You pay your dues, you show the work that you can do, and then you start to talk about what might be the next step. Now the next step gets discussed during the interviews. They want to know, okay, yeah, I would like this job. I'm applying for this job, but as a part of applying for this job, I'd like to know what might the next job be. That's just part of their nature today. And we have to get our heads around that and accept that and make sure that we help employees see the growth potential in every aspect of the work that they're doing. Employees ask for recognition and appreciation. And that word appreciation, it ties back to emotional intelligence. They want someone to say, that was great. Hey, I appreciate you delivering that on time. I had one person say to me, oh, so is this a everyone gets a trophy sort of environment where you get a trophy for just doing your job? And I said to him, would that be so bad?
Mm.
Would it be so bad if everyone gets a trophy for doing their job? My ideal career would be to be an actor. I would love to be a film actor because they get trophies even for their bloopers. They make mistakes, and actually their bloopers get turned into something. I wish I could get paid for my bloopers. I wish I could get appreciated but there is no corporate blooper reel for the most part. But
We can
Brett,
make
I
one.
think,
Don't worry.
and I would be a definite contributor for sure. The dialing up our empathy for recognition, dialing up our willingness to say, hey, I just appreciate because I have so much of a struggle getting other people to deliver on time, as requested. And the fact that I can always count on you, I just want you to know I appreciate that. Or other just verbal recognitions, um, so that they sense that you do in fact appreciate them as a human being and you appreciate the work that they're doing. And finally, trust and transparency. Employees are asking for it. They define it in different ways, but like I said before, there are all these forces of cynicism, and what employees are hoping for is a leader I can trust, a leader who's competent, a leader who is taking us in a direction that I can trust. And they're feeling like they don't have this. So I would encourage you to think about these things and assess yourself objectively. The four biggest gaps when we ask them not only what are you looking for in a leader, but what are the gaps that you perceive? These are the big ones. Inadequate communication. They don't communicate enough. They don't communicate clearly. They don't or sometimes they communicate too much, but they hide like the core message under all of the communication. So inadequate communication skills, struggling with hybrid work leadership. You know, leading a hybrid or a remote team is its own set of skills, and you can't just assume the way you led in an on-site world is going to transition into are
I think you,
overwhelmed. So
oh,
of course, if
you
you're
froze up
overwhelmed
for
as
a
a
few seconds
manager,
then, Dan. Sorry. Sorry,
I'm
Dan. You froze
sorry.
up for a few seconds.
Sorry about that. Of course, if you're overwhelmed or burned out as a manager, you're not going to be able to provide the emotional support, the empathy that your employees are looking for. But the one that really caught my attention was functional competence. There's a high degree of employees who don't perceive their leaders as functionally competent. Now, this may, and there's probably a whole webinar to be done on, well, where does that come from and what's the driver of that? But I think one of the drivers is as our world has been shifting, we've been asking younger, newer leaders to take on bigger roles sooner, faster. And they want to because they want to grow, they want to develop. But then we end up with leaders in positions who may not have the functional expertise that we really need. So I'll leave it at that for now. Couple of more slides to share with you. So if you ask yourself, well, what is the optimal leadership model today? We've obviously done a lot of thinking and research in this space. And we have a leadership model we call the Vanguard leadership model. And that is a model that is really designed to be responsive to all of these disruptions that we've been covering. A Vanguard leader from our viewpoint, is a leader who has mastered AI and the digital world. They've mastered remote leadership and collaboration. They've mastered both strategic thinking and tactical execution. Their communication skills are a high impact. In a world of information overwhelm, they have those skills to break through the tornado, the hurricane of information, and actually communicate clearly in that world. And they have that level of social and emotional intelligence to to deal with a workforce that needs humanity in a world that can be very dehumanizing sometimes. So we've taken each of these five categories, we've broken down the actual skill sets that contribute to each of these categories, and we've built a competency model and a training program, designed to address that. But our goal here is just to give you some tools for self-reflection. So we're going to be following up with a document that gives you a list of self-reflection questions. And I guess the last thing I would share with you is these are just some of the questions from the document. This is not a one and done sort of thing. We're not, I would hope that you don't just take the document and say, all right, I'll give it 5 minutes. This is a document you probably want to spend weeks with. Ask yourself one or two questions and think about them and give it time. Give it the depth that it really deserves. And don't forget to ask this question: how do I know what I think I know? As you answer these questions, ask yourself, am I just making assumptions about the way I am or the way I'm perceived? How do I know what I think I know is a critically important question if you're going to do deep self-reflection as a leader. And so I'm recommending alone time. I'm recommending thoughtful time. I'm recommending that just from this webinar alone, if you take this and reflect. I know the recording's going to be posted. You could even watch it again because I know I covered a lot of disruption in the first half of the webinar, and it might have been a bit overwhelming. So spend some time thinking about yourself. And again, I will note we do have this library of leadership development courses. We have our Vanguard leadership program. And if there is any interest at all, reach out to Lee. Lee he's the guy. I mean, he's the guy who understands how to connect a client's needs to specific solutions and would love to have those conversations with you, I'm sure. With that, I want to be highly respectful of everyone's time. We are exactly on time. And
Uh,
I think in a remote world, we all want to be respectful of everyone's time. So we're out. Thank you so much for your engagement during this time. And hopefully
Thank
we'll
you,
talk at
everybody.
some point in the future. Thank you now.
Bye.